Pixel Guidance!
So I'm here with Dan James, Patreon extraordinaire and beer lover. He's done our favorite thing by sending us beer at one point, which was excellent. And we had it on the show. So I wanted to say hi to Dan and get his what his crown jewel of his collection is. So hello, Dan.
Hey Eric, how you doing?
Good. So now I'm eager. I'm eager to hear this. So what is the crown jewel of your collection?
Oh, I've gone back and forth, but I think in the end, for me, I've always been a Commodore guy since day one. The first computers at my school were Commodore PETs, and so that was the first thing I programmed on. And the first home computer that I ended up with the able to afford really at that time would have been was a VIC 20, and so I still have my original VIC 20 in its case. I refer to it now as a Franken VIC because it actually has a C64 PC board inside it. Um,
And you
those things,
and we had
those things
talked a
that
little bit.
happen, yeah, those things that happen in college,
Yeah.
where somewhere along the line, and maybe probably an adult beverage might have gotten spilled inside a keyboard at one time, and so we decided to transplant the 64 board inside the VIC case because that it's pretty easy to
Yeah.
notch out a few things in the back and hook up the keyboard. Um,
So for our audio listeners, so this is a gold label VIC 20 that has some cutouts in the back that I had mentioned to you look really good for a hack job, as you had mentioned. That looks pretty clean. The gold label Vics, yeah. I mean, my first Vic was a rainbow label one, but every Vic I've purchased since then, which I think I've purchased 3 different ones, have been gold label ones.
and I wasn't even sure where those fell in the timeline. I've heard people talk about them. Are the gold ones the earlier ones?
They're the earlier ones. They have the
Okay.
2 prong power supplies.
Yeah.
And then the rainbow labeled Vic uses the same power supply as the Commodore 64.
This actually has the 64 board in it, so I don't remember now
Yeah.
that you talk about it. I do remember those power supplies got really hot. It
Oh
was
yeah.
that Vic brick. I mean, that thing it
Yep.
was smoking hot. I remember that.
Yep. And I've since then I've always tried to find the rainbow labeled Vic because you can share the power supply with the Commodore
Right.
64, which would, for desk space and under your desk, that would be really handy. I haven't
Sure.
been able to find one reasonably priced, so I just end up with the Vic 20 gold label ones, and they do work fine. They seem to get a little more interference on the RF,
Mm.
but I try not to use RF anyway.
I would like to get another board for this one at some time, so I kind of kept my eyes out for it. I don't really want to, ruin a good Vic, so I've kept my eyes open for someone with a board sitting out there. There's enough guys out there to give one of your sponsors a plug, Retro Rewind, that can you give them a reasonably
Yeah.
functional board or close to functioning board. They can get that stuff working if you don't want to spend the time to do it yourself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They're fantastic. Like we're preparing a very large box to send to Retro Rewind of stuff that we can't hack, like
Sure.
fix together. Because I mean, I have like we always talk about the box of broken dreams. I have a box of
Hmm.
broken dreams that stuff I've tried to work on, and I'm going to take the best of those things and try to ship them to Frank at Retro Rewind, try to get them fixed up. So yeah, I encourage you to do that if you ever find a good Vic motherboard or whatever that it can be salvaged.
Yeah, it would be nice just to put one back in this case, just to have something that's functional again. I think. I have enough 64s and other boards. I have 3 or 4 bread bins that, in various states of repair or that I've had to replace and, go to a Swinsid or something like that and that aren't necessarily original anymore,
You don't
but
have a Vic
are
20
functional.
now though, right?
No, I don't. So just the case, just the memory.
Just the it's just the
Yeah,
memories
just the
now.
memory. But
Um,
and it's still cool. I mean, it's still, yeah, like you mentioned before we talked online, the things we did to pay for those things back then. This was a layaway at Kmart.
yeah,
I think where my mom paid for half, and I think that I paid for the other half with doing paper route and
yep,
mowing lawns and whatever you need to do to pay off the last $20 a month or whatever it was you had to do to pay off the balance.
that's right. And Vic 20 was my first home computer too. But I wish we would have had pets at school. We had Apple IIs and TRS-80 Model 1s and 3s,
Yeah,
and
when
that
I
was
got to
it.
high school, that's what they had was Apple IIs. So the 2C and the 2Es are what I ended up doing more programming on. Good old integer basic.
Yeah. But you have
Did
a
my
you but you had pets. See, I never had seen a real pet until I got the one I have, the 2001.
Yeah, our whole school district, that's what they ended up. I'm sure Commodore at that time probably did that. They went to
Yeah,
the whole school district, so every school got like one or two, depending on the size of your school.
yeah,
And I went to a fairly small private elementary school at that time. So when it was seventh or eighth grade, so 81, 80, 81.
yeah.
And I actually found some pictures that I've posted on Twitter, I think once before, that was the summer before. It was a picture of all of the elementary school teachers at a summer
Yeah,
class being taught how to use these because they were going to get them at the next schools the next year.
yeah,
So it's pretty cool. It's got a row of all of these all these pets with the principal and of all of the different schools. Kind of, they probably sent a representative or two from each school.
yeah.
And
And wasn't
so
it funny
yeah,
that back then, like, the teachers really didn't know computers well at all? Because I remember the
no,
first computer lab we had in junior high, I set up the computer lab with the teacher. Like, I showed an interest in it, and so we set it up
yeah.
together.
Yeah, our principal, Mr. Weiss, was learning right along with me. He and I unboxed them and hooked them up, and my mom picked me up late from school, so I was able to stay late and
Yeah.
basically mess around on them as I could. And like we had one 8050 floppy drive to, at that time those were the IEEE 488, so you could share them among multiple machines.
Yeah.
So I think both computers plugged into the one floppy drive, dual drive, and so yeah, I learned a ton on those. They
And
were great.
what grade were you in at that point?
That would have been seventh or eighth grade, 80,
Yeah.
81.
Yeah, the funny
Yeah,
thing is that mirrors me too. I was in 7th grade, the first computer
yeah.
lab. First computers I ever touched were in 7th grade at the computer lab.
Yeah, they were great. We had so much. I don't think we really had a computer lab at that point. It was probably just a corner of the library
Well,
that
this
became that for sure.
ours was a closet in the science room. Like, it was
Yeah,
Mr. Richardson. He was my science teacher, and he
sure.
had a pretty good sized closet in the back where was storage closet.
Yeah,
And we cleared that out, built desks in there, and he just said, "Hey, set all these up." And it was all
yeah.
the TRS-80s and Apple IIs.
It certainly took me down my Commodore journey. Went from pets to my first Vic to I and my neighbor both had 64s.
Yeah.
Pretty much all my buddies I hung out with in high school all had 64s. I still have my Amiga 1000 that I got in college. So the one piece that kind of hooks to all of those together is I still have the crown jewel. Probably if I had to pick a second would be the 1702 monitor,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it powered my 60. It was the display for my 64s. It was the display for my Amiga 1000. It was one of the nice things about the 1000 when it came out is it would do color composite out,
Yeah.
which the Amiga 500 would only do black and white composite out. You had to have the RGB out in order to get that. So that 1702 it still works to this day.
That's
From
pretty that
83, 84,
that's
and
amazing.
yeah, I've hooked everything up to that thing over the years. So yeah, that's pretty amazing. I have a good time reading on the Commodore Historical Society page on Facebook, and Bill Hurd and all those guys, how they're just astounded that these computers they designed for a 5 to 10 year max life, and 40 years later
Yeah.
people are still using them, even if you have to recap them or replace a SID or replace a VIC chip. They're still chugging along. Pretty amazing.
That's awesome. No, that's great. So that Vic would have been your crown jewel just for the memories,
Yeah, it's
and the
where it
1702
started.
monitor. Yeah, man, I never had I never had a computer monitor, a Commodore computer monitor as a young kid or teen. I ended up my Vic, the whole time I used my Vic, I had a black and white little tiny TV.
That's what I
And
used it on at home. Yeah.
yeah, and then every once in a while, my parents would let me hook it up to the big TV, the color TV in the living room, but only like when I had a friend over or something.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the time was in my room with the little black and white. And still remember the brand was Emerson,
Sure.
Emerson black and white with the dials and the UHF, the
Yeah.
little antennas.
I think
And
the
then
TV mine was on was like it was probably like a little 10-inch or 12-inch
yeah,
that it went into our camper,
yeah,
like when we went to the lake or something on the weekend. That was kind of like the spare TV.
yep, yep. And then I remember the day I got the little color TV, same size, might have even been the same brand, but it was a color TV. And then it was kind of fortunate thinking back that those all those computers allowed you to use regular TVs with the RF
For
thing.
sure. Yeah, the switch box in the back. I mean, I used my VIC on it. We had the Atari 2600 was our first game console, the
Yeah.
VCS.
Yep.
And like I mentioned, off the when we first started, I've got my sister still has it, and I don't think it's a heavy sixer. It is still the six switch, but I think it's the later edition.
Yeah.
But and I still have the StarPath supercharger that my neighbor Paul actually bought that was like the upgrade to the VCS, where you could plug in that supercharger and load games off cassette.
Yeah.
And man, we spent hours playing Dragon Stomper, and that was a great game.
That's the one game I remember that you could buy that and it was on tape and then you
Right.
could load that up. I can't remember a single other game that supported that supercharger, but
There
there
was
had to
there
have
was
been
a
other
game
ones,
called
right?
like Mindbender or something like that. That
Okay.
was like a maze game. But yeah, there were, and I have a version of Frogger that was brilliant on it. It's
Oh,
amazing.
wow.
It sounds like 64 sound coming out of that thing. It was amazing.
Oh, that's crazy. No,
And of
I
course,
that
it's my own mind too. We have our vision of what things look like and what they sounded like 40 years ago, and then you hear them again,
exactly.
and you're like, it's not quite as great as I remember it.
Even to this day, I still load up some of the old Commodore 64 games that I played back in the day, and I try to play them. There was one called the Human. Oh man, now I'm gonna blow my memory of this. It was called the Human League. Yeah, it was
Mm,
called the Human League. And I remember that game thinking this looks so great, and it was such a fun game. And I loaded up. I couldn't even figure out what I was doing in the game. Like I
yeah,
was like, I don't. I Some of those games were pretty wacky.
yeah. I admit I have to cringe every time I want to reach through the podcast player and
Yeah,
smack Cody on the side of the cheek when he says the muddy colors of a C64. I'm like, perspective, man. You need to have some perspective on what was available back then.
yeah. I take
So I
I
know
take
I
great
know
offense to that too.
he has his own perspective, and I understand it. He came along just after we did, so
Yeah,
and you're
and
used to it.
if you do compare it to something like the original Nintendo, I mean, it is night
Sure,
and day difference. The color palettes are much different.
absolutely.
But when I compare, because Cody will compare the ZX Spectrum to the C64 and the color sets. I'd take the C64 color palette over the ZX Spectrum
Yeah,
any
all
day
day
of the
long.
week. So I
But
don't know. I was
we're
used to
probably
that.
biased a little bit too,
Yeah, absolutely. But
just a smidge.
I I'll take the C64 any day of the week. That's my main computer. Growing just like you, I
Yeah.
was the Commodore kid, and mainly because most of my other friends had that. I only had one friend who had an Atari,
Mm.
and other than that, everyone else had Commodores that I knew of.
Yeah, I had a friend that was more of a programmer guy from day one, and he had the TRS-80 Model 2, Model 3 once they went to the full,
Yeah.
one
Yep.
system, and uh, and that looked like a real computer. You went into his, and you're like, dude, that's like a real computer.
Yeah, it's like a
You know,
terminal, like some
yeah,
kind of war
exactly.
games terminal.
Exactly. It looked like a real terminal. And that's not to bash on my own history, but the 64 for us, for the most part, was a game computer. Even though, sorry, Doug, I know there is productivity software for the 64. I did run
Right.
Geos on it for a while. I
Yeah.
still have my 1764 RAM expander, even though I actually used it more for my bulletin board system than I ever used it for Geos. But
Yeah.
uh, yeah,
I bought a lot once. Like there was somebody locally, in fact, here in the town that I live in, they was selling a lot of Commodore 64 stuff. And I sent a lot of that stuff to Tim, if you remember, like a
mm,
lot of the boxed games.
right.
But one of the things that was in the lot was the Okamate 10 printer. Do you
Oh
remember
yeah,
that? It was that little one. It was actually pretty small. But it brought back memories. I completely forgot that I had one of those towards the end of my life with Commodore 64.
yeah. Talking about lots, if you don't mind me turning around.
No, no problem at all.
How about this was kind of a Commodore's version of that, the 1520.
Yeah, and I had one of those, the printer plotter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's what it kind of reminded me of, was the Oki Data, and I got this as part of a lot. I didn't even know it was with it when I bought that 128 off eBay.
yeah,
It was in the box with a 128. I got the 128 at 1571, and that was like 3 years ago. And I don't even think I paid $250 for it, and it looked brand new.
wow,
I mean, yeah, I still use that 1571 with the. I use it with the what's the little card called, with a Zoom floppy, and
yeah,
it works brilliant with the Zoom floppy.
yeah.
And that's what I've been using to image all my old 64,
Oh,
five and
that's
a
awesome.
quarters,
Yeah,
and is that 71, and it works. I've never had to align it. I pulled the case off, cleaned it with a Q-tip, and otherwise it's beautiful.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
That
those are
print,
two things I did go back and buy, was a 71, and I bought a 1581, which I never owned. I had friends that did,
yeah.
and
I sent my 1581 to Tim because I knew he'd appreciate it more than mine was sitting in my garage for a
yeah,
couple of years and I never used it, and so I knew he'd appreciate it more.
and they've
Uh,
gotten crazy on price too.
yeah, yeah. But the 1520 plotter, I remember, I went into a store and they were blowing those out for 20 bucks. And
Yeah,
so I grabbed one and I had this printer plotter, and those were so much fun. I mean, even
there's a
just
cool little
printing
printer.
text, even printing
Yeah.
text. I remember I'd print little documents and letters and stuff and just print them out, and you could do ribbons.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember, do you follow Paul Ricard's
Yeah,
on,
he
he's
does
a,
amazing plotter stuff.
amazing stuff with plotters. And then
Oh,
I had a discussion with him once. He found sources for the little pens.
oh yeah.
So because those were, you couldn't find them anymore for many many years, and now there's, I think, a new source of them.
Well, and the one thing this 1520 is missing is it's missing the little arms on the back that holds the paper roll.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
if you go out to Thingiverse, there's people that have all of those little things that are missing that you can 3D print, replace their
That
replacement versions of them.
that actually
And
makes me happy, because I,
yeah,
out of all the printers I had growing up, the 1520 was the most one I had fun with, quote unquote
yeah,
fun, because the Okamate 10, I just printed school reports and stuff
right.
like that on. I didn't use it for fun, but man, I remember that 1520. I loved it.
Yeah, we had I think I bought a Star Micronics, the SG10, I think was the one that they made a adapter for the 64. That was that worked great. I had a
Yeah.
1525, I think originally for doing printer reports, and I used to get knocked down on reports because it wouldn't do descending characters. The
Yeah,
1525 wouldn't, so it would
that's right.
shift up for all the G's and the Y's,
Yep, I remember that.
anything with a tail. So they're like, buy a real printer. Uh,
So I'm going to bring this back into gaming, because we are a gaming podcast.
sure.
Since the crown jewel is the VIC 20, what was your favorite game on the VIC 20?
Oh, the no question, the Scott Adams stuff, the
Oh yeah,
adventure. Yeah, all those early adventure carts were the big ones.
and
Probably the
I
games
think
I
I
played the
had
most. Pirates Cove.
Voodoo
Um,
Castle. I
yeah,
remember I had
those.
Voodoo Castle. I had Pirates Cove. There was another one that I know, and I can't remember the name of it, but I had those too, and those were one of the first games that I got on
Hmm.
the VIC 20. And then I think, if you heard last episode, I picked Omega Race, which was
Yeah,
the first arcade game I got on the VIC 20, and I loved that game, and that's why I picked it as one of my favorites. Whatever
sure.
Cody says.
Yeah, I don't remember playing arcade games on the Vic much. I probably only had it maybe a year before I got my 64.
Same here.
So I did some of the programming, did a lot of the stuff out of the magazines, and then I
Yep.
know I had a handful of the cartridge games that
Yeah.
were mostly the Scott Adams games. I do remember having the horrible Atari uh, Pac-Man clone um,
I don't. Yeah, I
for the
don't think.
Vic
Yeah,
that
I
was
don't think I
terrible.
had that. Yeah, I don't think I had that one.
And then I was up in Colorado with a friend, we bought he bought the penultimate cartridge,
Yeah.
and we had played that, and so they have the version of Pac-Man that Atari didn't release. It was done by somebody else, that
Right.
Munchers or something like that it's called, and it's brilliant. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. That
Um,
penultimate cartridge from The Future Was 8-bit is amazing. Like,
yeah,
I was lucky I got an early copy of that, because Tim had a hookup for me, and
mm,
I put that in. I was like, this is all you need, a Vic
yeah,
and
it
this,
is.
and that's all you need.
And I
Oh,
tell people that if they've got a VIC 20 and they just want the retro experience of to have it
yep.
functional, gives you all your memory, gives you probably the 20 or 30 best games,
Yep.
and that's all you need to throw that on and say this is what this machine can do.
Yep.
Yeah,
Old games, new games, memory expansions. It
yep,
had it had everything on there.
yeah.
A
That's a
terminal
great card.
program. It's amazing.
Yep.
All right, Dan. Cool. Well, I think that's gonna be it. But thank you for telling us the crown jewels of your collection, and we really do appreciate that you're a Patreon supporter. It means a lot to us. It means a lot to all three of us that people would be willing to support the show. So I really
No,
appreciate it.
I appreciate you guys. You guys make me laugh on my commute to work, and you guys. It's always fun to listen to you guys kind of chat back and forth, because it's again, it's like my buddies when I was in school. That was what we did: get together, shoot the shit, and
Yep.
you like this, I don't like this. This is why I like this one, and what are you crazy that you don't like that game?
Exactly.
Yeah, good
All
times.
right. Thanks a
Appreciate it.
lot, Dan.
Thanks, Eric.